When we picture the early Jesus movement, we usually imagine apostles sort of preaching in temple courts or debating in the synagogues, don't we? But preaching, well, it does not feed people, does it? It does not house the displaced. It does not protect children when persecution comes. But if we look carefully at the earliest records, we discover something, well, really quite surprising. Because behind every gathering, every safe house, every surviving community, there were women quietly holding everything together. Now, the gospel writer Luke never gives us a single chapter in his gospel entitled, say, the women of the church. No. Instead, we find that women appear everywhere, quietly, consistently, decisively. This was not because women were unimportant. It was because Luke was writing history in motion. See, not some modern biography, if you like. He assumed that his audience understood something, well, we often forget. See, in the ancient world, households were the primary units of social life, of economic support, and indeed of religious practice. And women often govern them. Now, if we want to understand how the Jesus movement endured pressure, persecution, and even displacement, well, we must understand who controlled the households. And the writer Luke tells us something quite astonishing in his gospel. Luke chapter 8 and 1 through to 3. Now, we're not going to read them all, but the 12 were with him and also some women who were helping to support them out of their own means. And this was not some symbolic support, it was financial and logistical patronage. See, among those first names Luke records in the upper room, one stands out quietly: Mary, the mother of Jesus. Luke writes in Acts 1 and verse 14, with one accord, they all continued in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And then he never mentions them again, or her again. No speeches, no leadership titles, no journeys, no decisions at the council, just presence. Now, this is quite striking because if anyone might have claimed special status in the movement, surely it would have been Mary. You see, she had carried Jesus, she had raised him, watched him grow, stood at the cross or the stake, whichever way you want to look at it. Yet Luke does not present her as some authority figure. No way elevated, not centralized, not ruling in the community, just praying with everyone else. And that restraint tells us something important about the early congregation. See, leadership was not inherited by a family line. It was not dynastic. It wasn't holy bloodlines. Authority came through faithfulness and calling, and it had nothing to do with biology. And this was exactly as Jesus had taught at Mark 3:35. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother. And you'll find this also in Matthew 12:50 and Luke 8:21. Still, we shouldn't mistake silence for insignificance. Just imagine what her presence meant. See, she alone carried memories no one else had. Stories of childbirth, stories of Nazareth, of the childhood, of the early years before the crowds. Remember, she used to store everything in her heart that he would say. She wasn't an organizer or a preacher, but she was something just as valuable. See, a living link to the very beginning, sort of a quiet anchor, if you like. And there were other women, such as Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the wife of Chusa, the Herod's steward, and Susanna. They funded and sustained Jesus' itinerant ministry. See, Joanna's presence alone tells us the movement had reached right into the elite administrative households. See, this matters much because the early church did not invent women's involvement, it inherited it directly from who? From Jesus himself. See, as the movement grows beyond the temple courts, it moves into where? Into homes. And homes had owners. Consider the women named in the book of Acts and the letters. Mary, mother of John Mark, whose house hosts prayer gatherings in Jerusalem. Acts 12 and verse 12. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered together and were praying. Lydia, a merchant and household head in Philippi, the first European convert. Acts 16 and verses 14 and 15. Among those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshipper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged us, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my home, at my house. And she persuaded us. Then there was Priscilla, a teacher alongside Aquila, Romans 16, 3-5. Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who have risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. Greet also the church that meets at their house. Tabitha, Dorcas, a benefactor known for charity and community care in Joppa, Acts 9 verse 36. See, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha, which is translated as Dorcas, who was always occupied with works of kindness and charity. Then we have Philip's own 4 daughters, recognized as prophetic voices. Acts 21 and verse 8 and 9. Leaving the next day, we went on to Caesarea and stayed at the home of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. See, these women, well, they were not passive attendees. They were hosts. They were patrons, organizers, teachers, and prophets. See, hospitality in the ancient world, it was not something casual. See, to host a gathering was to accept legal, social, and sometimes even physical risks. And women took that risk. See, when persecution begins, it often targets male leaders first, doesn't it? What happens next? Well, the movement retreats into where? Into households. Meetings become smaller. Support networks become absolutely essential. Money must be managed and managed discreetly. Food must be distributed, and again, discreetly and quietly. Children must be protected. Refugees must be housed. And this is where the leadership of women becomes structural rather than visible. Now, in Antioch, especially where households replaced the temple courts as the primary meeting places. Women were not an accessory to the mission. No, no, no. They were its infrastructure. The earlier appointment of the deacons already showed us that something critical was acknowledged: the care for the widows. It was a community responsibility, not just some sort of charity optics. See, in the ancient world, widows were legally vulnerable, but socially very influential. They often became anchors of moral authority, of prayer, and teachings within the communities. Later letters actually formalized this role, but its roots were already present there. See, widows were not sidelined. They were protected because they mattered. Now, this concern, it flowed directly from Jesus' own teachings and, of course, Israel's covenant ethic. See, Antioch, the city of Antioch's strength, was not only cultural openness, which it was domestic stability. See, mixed communities require, require patient instruction, don't they? Relational trust, consistent hospitality, economic resilience. And women provided continuity, especially when leadership rotated for one reason or another, either by traveling or facing opposition. And this explains why Antioch did not fragment under pressure. The movement there was not built only on preaching, it was built on a lived community. Three conclusions really are unavoidable. The women were foundational, they weren't auxiliary. Authority was expressed through service and stewardship. And the Jesus movement survived because it was embodied in their daily life. Now, this is not some modern projection, it is historical reality. See, Luke does not argue with this, he just naturally assumed it. Why? Because it was there. See, when you step back and look at this early community, something becomes very clear. See, it was built on, not on big personalities. It wasn't built on power. It was built on ordinary faithfulness. Deacons, recall, serving food. Widows praying. Families opening their homes. Women funding the work. Teachers traveling. Believers sharing whatever they had. And right there among them, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Not exalted, not set above everyone else, just praying with the rest. And that feels exactly right, doesn't it? Because this movement never revolved around status. It revolved around obedience, shared meals, open homes, and just quiet service. And this was all before there were any sort of church buildings, before any titles came along, before politics entered into the system. They were just people, faithful people, carrying forward the life and the teachings of Jesus together, and of course, with honesty. Now, that might still be the congregation, what it looks like at its very best. And that's what it was. And of course, this leads us forward to our next episode. You see, we see a sort of a parallel roadway opening up for the expansion of the movement. You see, this new pathway, it was anchored some 300 miles north of Jerusalem in northern Syria at Antioch. And that is where we're heading in our next episode, to examine the situation there. So, until then, thank you once again, And see you next time.